You know that feeling, right? When something you're really, really counting on just doesn't happen.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it's something small, like the coffee shop being out of your favorite pastry. Or it could be huge, like a job offer falling through.
Mm-hmm.
We've all felt that sort of deflation, that sense of...
Yeah, that little punch in the gut.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So today, we're going to unpack that feeling, disappointment.
That gap, between what we hoped for and what actually happened. That's precisely what we're digging into in this deep dive. We've got some really fascinating material that helps us understand this incredibly common human thing.
Right. So we're looking at what disappointment fundamentally is, why it seems to be just part of life, like universal. You see hints of it in animals.
Yeah, echoes of it.
And what's going on, like, under the hood
Hmm.
in our brains, maybe even our genes, when we feel let down.
And we'll also trace how it shapes us, throughout our lives, from being a kid and having small letdowns to those big adult turning points, and how it affects our relationships, society, all of it. Plus, we'll get into the cognitive side, the emotional landscape, how it messes with our decisions, and the, frankly, sometimes weird ways we show it.
And because this is the deep dive, we're even going to touch on some philosophical angles, right?
Right.
What thinkers have said about it, and maybe, just maybe, if there are any upsides. Seems counterintuitive.
It does, but we'll explore that. And finally, the modern twist. Artificial intelligence. Can AI actually get disappointment? Could it, help us deal with it?
That's a big one.
It is. So our mission here is really to pull out the key insights, those surprising bits about disappointment, to give you a richer understanding of this whole thing, this fundamental human experience.
Yeah.
Without, getting totally bogged down.
Okay, sounds good. Let's start with the basics then. What is disappointment, really? It feels simple, but I guess there's more to it than just feeling bummed out.
Exactly. Yeah, at its core, psychologically speaking, it's that feeling of dissatisfaction. It pops up when our hopes, our expectations just aren't met. And there was this guy, Bell, back in 1985. He put it quite formally. He said, disappointment is basically proportional to the difference between expectation and outcome.
Expectation minus outcome.
Right. So the bigger that gap, the bigger the disappointment. And the crucial word there is expectation. That's the driver.
That makes total sense. Sometimes the buildup, the anticipation, can feel even stronger than whatever the thing was supposed to be.
Definitely.
Now, you mentioned it's important not to mix it up with regret. They feel similar sometimes, but they're different.
That's a really key distinction, yeah. Regret usually zeroes in on our own actions, right? That, if only I'd done X instead of Y feeling.
Right, your choice.
Exactly. Disappointment, though, it's more about the outcome itself. Doesn't matter so much if you had control, like you plan the perfect picnic, do everything right, but then it pours rain. That's disappointment.
Okay, got it.
The natural disaster example is perfect for that no personal choice involved, just an outcome you didn't want.
Right, a different kind of ooh. And it sounds like this isn't just a quick feeling that passes. It can actually, impact our well-being.
Oh, for sure. It's recognized as a source of psychological stress. And how quickly we bounce back from disappointment. That really varies person to person, situation to situation. It's not one size fits all.
And the word itself, disappoint, it didn't always mean feeling let down, did it?
No, it's fascinating. It used to mean something really specific, like being removed from an office or a position. Then it kind of broadened out to mean general frustration and eventually landed on this internal emotional state we know today. It sort of mirrors how we've come to understand these complex feelings better over time.
Okay, so we're getting a handle on what it is. But it's not like only certain people feel this way. It seems like, well, everyone gets disappointed sometimes.
Precisely. That's one of the main takeaways. Disappointment is truly universal. Doesn't matter about gender, age, culture, history. It's just part of the human package.
Yeah, I mean, kids get gutted when their balloon pops, right?
Yeah.
And adults feel that same deflation when, I don't know, a career goal doesn't pan out. Seems like it just shows up differently at different ages.
That's a great way to put it. And if you track it across life stages, the triggers evolve. For little kids, it's often about immediate stuff, things they want right now.
The dropped ice cream cone.
Exactly. Classic. But as we get older, our disappointments tend to get tangled up with those bigger life expectations. Career, relationships, finances, where we think we should be. And those can carry a lot more emotional weight.
And culture must play a role too, right? Not just in what disappoints us, but maybe how we show it or deal with it.
Oh, hugely. This brings up the whole social dimension. How we express disappointment, how we comfort others who are feeling it, that's all shaped by cultural norms.
Like what's considered okay to show.
Right. Some research compares how people in the US versus, say, Germany express sympathy. Different styles. Even just the everyday words we use for being let down vary a lot across the globe. So the core feeling might be universal, but how we navigate it socially, definitely culture dependent.
So someone trying to be supportive could totally miss the mark if they don't get those nuances.
Easily.
And it's not just personal stuff either, is it? Like whole groups of people, whole societies can feel disappointed.
Absolutely. That's macro societal disappointment. You see it throughout history. Think about the failure of big projects or major social movements that don't achieve their aims. Like, the sources mentioned the failure of Reconstruction in the U.S. after the Civil War. That left a lasting sense of disillusionment. Or maybe after the fall of the Soviet Union and Russia. Widespread disappointment.
Wow. So, okay, feels bad. It's everywhere. It happens on big scales. Is there a reason we have this emotion? Is it actually useful somehow?
Well, this loops back to the evolutionary perspective. The fact that it's so pervasive strongly suggests it serves some kind of adaptive purpose.
Like a warning signal.
Kinda, yeah. It signals that something didn't match our expectations. And that prompts us to learn, maybe adjust our goals, update our map of the world. It's a key part of navigating a world that's, let's face it, pretty unpredictable.
That makes sense. If you keep banging your head against the same wall and getting disappointed, eventually that feeling pushes you to find a door, right?
Exactly. Find a different approach. And this basic mechanism, expectation versus reality, seems to have roots even deeper than humanity. We see signs of it in the animal kingdom, too.
Oh, really? Okay, tell me more. Do animals get disappointed like we do?
Well, it's probably not quite the same. It's unlikely they feel regret, that complex thinking about what if I'd chosen differently. Most animals probably don't do counterfactuals like that.
Okay.
But disappointment in that more basic sense, an expectation not being met. Yeah, there seem to be evolutionary precursors. Scientists talk about something called reward prediction error, RPE.
Reward prediction error. Okay, break that down.
So it's basically how the brain flags a mismatch between the reward an animal expected to get and the reward it actually got.
Like Pavlov's dogs, but when the bell rings and there's no food.
Exactly like that. Or, say, a rat learns that pressing a lever gets it a food pellet. It expects the pellet. If it presses the lever and nothing comes out, its brain registers an error signal, a negative RPE. It's fundamental to how animals learn.
Okay.
And what's really interesting is that this RPE mechanism, it actually has strong parallels with how some AI systems learn through reinforcement. And Bell's definition we talked about earlier, expectation minus outcome, it maps surprisingly well onto this biological RPE process. It gives AI a way to sort of structurally understand disappointment, even without feeling it.
Wow. So that little pang we feel might be connected to this really ancient learning system. That's pretty cool, actually.
It is. And when we dig into the biology in humans, we need to look at the neurobiology. What's actually firing in our brains when we feel let down?
Okay, let's go there. The brain. Where does disappointment live? Is there like a disappointment spot?
Well, there's a small but really key structure called the habenula. It often gets called the brain's disappointment center.
The habenula, okay.
It plays a critical role in processing negative feedback and, importantly, regulating our motivation. So when we experience disappointment, that expected reward doesn't show up, the habenula kicks into gear, it gets active.
And what does that activation do? Like, what's the result?
Well, it's linked to that drop in motivation we often feel and those generally negative feelings associated with being let down. And it's tightly connected to dopamine.
Oh, dopamine. Usually the reward chemical, right?
Right. So there's this circuit between the habenula and another area called the VTA, the ventral tegmental area, which is a major dopamine production hub. Normally, when we anticipate something good, VTA dopamine neurons get ready to fire. But if the reward doesn't materialize...
The habenula steps in.
Exactly. The habenula signals this negative reward prediction error, and it actually suppresses those dopamine neurons in the VTA. No reward, less dopamine activity. Conversely, if you get a pleasant surprise, more dopamine.
So it's like a seesaw. Expectation high, outcome low, habenula activates, dopamine dips.
That's a good way to think about it. It's a feedback loop. And remember Bell's definition, expectation minus outcome.
Yeah.
Researchers have found that functionally, that definition looks remarkably similar to how this RPE system works with dopamine. It's like our conscious understanding lines up with this basic brain mechanism.
Wow. That's neat.
Yeah.
But you also mentioned this can have bigger implications for, like, mental health.
Yes, unfortunately. Chronic stress seems to make the habenula more sensitive. It's almost like it gets primed to expect bad news.
Oh.
And studies have shown increased habenular activity in people struggling with depression or anxiety. It suggests a potential link where ongoing intense disappointment or just prolonged stress could make the habenula hyperactive.
Leading to more negative feelings.
Potentially, yes. If that disappointment center is constantly firing, it could contribute to a more negative outlook, maybe even create a cycle that tips into clinical depression.
So our reactions aren't just psychological, there's real biology involved. But what about genetics? Are some of us just wired to handle disappointment better?
That's a great question. And yes, there are definitely individual differences. How we react is shaped by a mix of our genes and our environment. Things like psychological resilience, that ability to bounce back, does seem to have a genetic component.
Okay.
But, and this is crucial, it's not just genes. Our early life experiences, the environment we grew up in, how those genes actually get expressed, that's hugely important too.
And so there isn't like one single get over it quick gene?
No, definitely not. It's much more complex. Traits like resilience and even our preferred coping styles, do you tackle the problem head on, focus on managing your feelings, or try to avoid it? Those are influenced by lots of genes, each with a small effect, plus our environment.
Polygenic, right?
Exactly, polygenic. And what's interesting is some research suggests a negative genetic correlation between resilience and that emotion-focused coping style. Meaning, people who might be genetically predisposed to feel negative emotions more strongly could potentially find it harder to be resilient in the face of disappointment.
That makes intuitive sense. If you feel things more deeply, maybe setbacks hit harder.
Precisely. And this could potentially tie back to that habenula sensitivity we talked about. Maybe a genetic tendency towards negative emotionality makes the habenula a bit more reactive, lowering resilience. But again, it's complex, not deterministic.
Okay. So we've got the immediate brain stuff, the longer-term genetic and environmental influences.
Yeah.
It's all woven together. Let's go back to that evolutionary idea. Why bother having this capacity at all if it feels so bad?
Well, from that evolutionary standpoint, even unpleasant emotions can be adaptive, right? That negative RPE signal is a powerful tool for changing behavior.
Learning what not to do again.
Exactly. It signals our prediction was wrong, our strategy failed, time to reevaluate. It helps us learn, adapt, avoid repeating mistakes. Think about it like trial and error on a grand scale.
Like the hot stove example.
Yeah.
Disappointment teaches you not to touch it.
Perfect example. And some theories even propose adaptive benefits for more intense reactions, like serious sadness or even depression following major disappointment.
Really? How could that be adaptive?
Well, hypotheses include things like a behavioral shutdown to conserve energy when things are really tough, or intense analytical thinking rumination to solve a complex problem that caused the setback, or even signaling to the social group, hey, I'm struggling, I need help.
Huh. That's surprising.
Yeah.
Feeling awful is a potential survival strategy.
In certain ancestral environments, potentially, yes. The main point is disappointment, even though it's unpleasant now, seems to play this vital role in learning and long-term adaptation. Trying to eliminate it entirely might actually mess up some fundamental mechanisms. That habenula, despite the negative feelings, is essential for adjusting to the world.
So, disappointment, not a bug, but a feature. Okay, got it. That shifts the perspective.
Yeah.
Now let's talk about how this plays out across our lives. From little kids to adults, it looks different, right?
Oh, absolutely. For kids, disappointment can feel massive, huge. Even things that seem tiny to us, a canceled play date, not getting the exact right toy, can trigger really intense feelings.
Because that is their whole world in that moment.
Exactly. So caregivers need to approach it with a lot of empathy, just understanding.
Yeah.
And while the triggers change as they grow, maybe it becomes not making the team or missing out socially the basic need for support. That stays pretty consistent. Those early experiences are really formative for building resilience later on.
So how can parents or caregivers help kids handle these feelings well? What works?
Several things seem key. First, just listen. Validate their feeling. Don't just brush it off or say, don't be sad. Acknowledge it. Yeah, that really stings. Then maybe offer some perspective gently. Help them see it's not the end of the world. Brainstorming solutions together, even small ones, gives them a sense of agency back.
Like, okay, the park is closed, but what else can we do?
Exactly. Giving them some control in other areas helps too. And reminding them of times they did cope with tough feelings can boost their confidence. Remember when X happened? You got through that.
So it's not about bubble wrapping them from disappointment.
Definitely not. Experiencing it and learning to cope, ideally in a supportive environment, is crucial for development. They learn setbacks are manageable.
And then we become adults, and the disappointments get, well, more complicated, tied into bigger life stuff.
Yeah, adult disappointment often gets tangled up with our life narratives, right? Those internal stories and societal yardsticks about careers, relationships, money. This just isn't where I thought I'd be at this age.
Oof, yeah. That feeling.
It's a common one, and when reality doesn't match that internal blueprint, that's a major source of adult disappointment.
It's like grieving the life you expected but didn't get.
That's a really good way to put it. It is like processing grief sometimes,
Yeah.
grieving the loss of that anticipated future. And as adults, we accumulate these losses, these unmet expectations. We need to actually acknowledge and process those feelings, not just push them down.
Okay. So disappointment isn't just personal. It obviously plays out hugely in our relationships, too.
Oh, absolutely. Relationships are prime territory for disappointment precisely because they involve expectations. Think about parents and children.
Yeah.
Parents often have hopes, dreams for their kids, education, career, maybe who they marry. When kids choose different paths, it can lead to parental disappointment. Sometimes parents even feel guilt, like the child's failure reflects on them.
That sounds like a recipe for tension.
It can be. And some research hints mothers might feel it more around relationship outcomes, while both parents might feel it about career stuff.
Yeah.
And how it's communicated is critical. Indirect criticism hints, size, comparisons can be really damaging, making kids feel less in control.
Like the disappointment is just hanging there, unsaid. That sounds worse. What about other relationships, friends, colleagues?
Same core dynamic, unmet expectations. We expect friends to be supportive, colleagues to be fair, neighbors to be considerate. When they aren't, a friend flakes on you, a coworker steals your idea, disappointment follows.
Because we go into these interactions with some level of trust or optimism.
Exactly. There's an inherent fragility there. It's interesting, some philosophical traditions like Confucianism see developing civility and social harmony partly as a way to manage these inevitable interpersonal disappointments.
Like social rules help cushion the blows.
Sort of, yeah. Managing expectations within the social contract. And it's not just personal relationships, right? Disappointment happens on a much broader societal stage.
You mean like jobs, status, money?
All of those, yes. Areas where our personal hopes meet external pressures. Think about workplace disappointment, feeling undervalued, passed over for promotion, stuck in a dead-end job, company culture clashes.
Sure.
These things can really hit our sense of self-worth, our security, our overall life satisfaction. Sometimes it feels like exploitation.
And politics, too. You mentioned that earlier. Seems like a constant source.
Political disappointment is definitely a defining experience for many populations. When big promises aren't kept, when movements fail, when systems feel unjust, that creates widespread disillusionment. Like those examples of U.S. reconstruction or post-Soviet Russia again.
But maybe that collective disappointment can also spark change.
It absolutely can. It can be a powerful catalyst for critical assessment and demanding something better. But across all these contexts, personal, work, society, the key seems to be how expectations get formed, how they're communicated, and how disappointments are handled. Mismanaged communication or pressure to always be optimistic just makes it worse. And unresolved disappointments about big life things, that can lead to a deep existential dissatisfaction.
Okay, so we've seen how widespread it is, how it impacts us across life and relationships. Let's dig into the cognitive stuff now. How does feeling disappointed actually change how we think and make decisions?
Well, it has a pretty significant impact, mainly through something called disappointment aversion. Basically, we often work harder to avoid feeling disappointed again than we do to chase potential gains.
So the fear of being let down can actually steer our choices, more than the hope of winning.
Often, yes. There's a whole field of decision theory looking at this. It suggests that when we weigh options, we mentally simulate the potential disappointment if things don't pan out. And that simulation influences our choice. We might go for the safer, less exciting option just to minimize the risk of that bad feeling.
The sure thing, even if it's smaller, feels better than risking a big flop.
Exactly. And empirical studies back this up. Like in experiments involving trust, people who'd been disappointed by others previously were much less likely to trust again in the future. More so than positive surprises made people more trusting. Disappointment seems to leave a stronger mark on future behavior.
Wow. And even how we set goals matters. Like focusing too much on a specific outcome can backfire.
Yeah, it's a bit of a paradox. If your goals are purely performance-based, I must get an A, I must close this deal, you inevitably won't hit every single one. This can lead to more frequent disappointment, activating the habenula we talked about, and paradoxically, decreasing motivation over time. The anticipation of disappointment can be incredibly powerful, shaping behavior before the outcome even happens.
So disappointment isn't just reactive, it's actively shaping our future choices. Okay, now how do we show it? It's not always just looking sad, is it?
Oh, not at all. The ways we express disappointment outwardly, they can be incredibly varied, sometimes surprising, even counterintuitive. And crucially, there's often a disconnect between the internal feeling and the external expression. Culture, context, personality, it all plays in.
Right, someone might force a smile even if they're crushed inside. So let's unpack some common and maybe less common expressions. Crying seems pretty straightforward.
Well, yes and no. Crying is often linked to the sadness of disappointment, but it can also express helplessness, frustration, anger, even fear, all emotions that can bubble up when expectations are dashed. It evolves from a basic infant signal to complex adult communication.
Okay. What about laughter? That seems like the total opposite. Why would someone laugh when they're disappointed?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. It can be several things. Nervous laughter, just releasing tension. Or, as the neuroscientist Ramachandran suggested, maybe it's a kind of false alarm signal telling ourselves and others, okay, this is bad, but maybe not catastrophic.
Like whistling past the graveyard?
Kind of, or finding the absurdity in it.
Yeah.
Learning to laugh at minor setbacks can be a coping mechanism. Like you trip spectacularly in public, laughing can diffuse your own embarrassment and maybe the awkwardness for others. There are various theories of humor relief, superiority, incongruity that might apply.
Okay. And anger. That seems more common. Disappointment turning into frustration or rage?
Definitely. Especially if the disappointment feels unfair or blocks a really important goal. That frustration can easily boil over into anger. And irritability, which is common in depression itself, sometimes linked to chronic disappointment, can make people lash out over small letdowns. This anger can be turned inwards as self-criticism or outwards damaging relationships.
Right. Anger is a way to fight back against the feeling of powerlessness. And you mentioned something really odd before happiness, like smiling when recounting something awful.
Yeah, incongruent effect. It can happen. Smiling while talking about tragedy or disappointment. Sometimes it's a defense mechanism trying to mask pain or appear okay. In some cases, it could be related to certain mental health conditions or even physical causes. It just highlights how complex emotional expression is. We have these display rules, often learned, about what's appropriate to show when.
So our outward reactions are often strategic ways to communicate or manage social situations, but they don't always map neatly onto the inner feeling. It makes understanding others tricky.
Precisely. Disappointment might start as that cognitive mismatch, expectation versus reality, but the emotional and behavioral fallout is shaped by so much else. Our psychology, history, culture, the specific situation. It's messy.
And our general state of mind, our beliefs, must shape how we experience it too, right? Like if you're an optimist versus a pessimist.
Absolutely. Your underlying beliefs act like a filter. There's even this disappointment effect hypothesis suggesting optimists might actually feel the sting more acutely when things go wrong.
Wait, really? Why?
Because the contrast is bigger, right? If you always expect sunshine, a sudden downpour feels more shocking than if you carried an umbrella just in case. The gap between expectation and reality is wider for the optimist in that moment.
Huh, never thought of it that way. And beliefs about control matter too.
Hugely. Remember the indirect parental criticism making kids feel less control. If you believe a disappointing outcome was totally beyond your influence, it can lead to helplessness. But if you believe you have some agency, that you can affect future outcomes, disappointment can actually spur you to try harder or smarter next time.
So it's about feeling empowered even after a setback.
Exactly. And some perspectives, like psychoanalytic ones from Lacan or sociological ones from Crabe, even argue that experiencing disappointment is necessary for growing up, for developing a realistic sense of self and the world. That cultures trying too hard to avoid disappointment might hinder maturity.
Wow. So disappointment is a developmental requirement.
That's the argument. It connects to things like stoicism, managing your judgments about events, or modern therapies like ACT, accepting difficult feelings without judgment. The common thread is engaging constructively with disappointment, not just wishing it away.
What about things like intuition or coincidence? Do they play a role when we're dealing with disappointment?
They can. Intuition, that gut feeling, might surface when we're anxious about potential disappointment, maybe offering a different path when logic feels stuck. And after a letdown, we might become more attuned to coincidences.
Looking for signs or meaning.
Yeah, maybe seeking comfort or a sign that things will work out or even a hint towards a new direction. It can be a way of reframing, but, you have to be careful not to overinterpret or rely on them too heavily. Weak plot device territory sometimes.
Right. Don't base your life plan on seeing the same number sequence twice.
Probably good advice.
Okay, so the inner world of disappointment is complex. Let's zoom out again to the philosophical and existential side.
Right. Philosophers have looked at disappointment not just as a feeling, but sometimes as reflecting something objectively wrong or lacking in the world. Like a corrupt government is objectively disappointing.
So it's not just in your head.
Exactly. And this leads to the idea of the politics of disappointment, that collective sense of letdown, driving critique, and demands for change. We touched on that. And again, you see themes of needing to engage with it for growth, whether it's Confucian ideas about civility managing social friction or psychoanalytic views on it being necessary for maturity. It's consistently presented as something to grapple with, not purely avoid.
But then you get to the really big questions.
Yeah.
Like, is life itself ultimately a disappointment? That sounds bleak.
Well, some philosophical traditions, like pessimism Schopenhauer is the classic example, lean that way. His idea of the ceaseless will, always striving, finding only fleeting satisfaction before the next desire pops up, leads inevitably to disappointment. The pendulum swing between boredom and suffering.
Cheery stuff.
Yeah. Existentialists also grapple with life's limits, potential meaninglessness, awareness of mortality, the absurd gap between our search for meaning and a potentially indifferent universe. This can feel like a setup for existential disappointment. But they often frame this confrontation as necessary for creating our own meaning.
And that user quote, "When a human dies, it need no human disappointments." That fits here, right?
Yeah.
Death is the ultimate escape from striving and letdown.
It taps right into that, the cessation of the cycle. It's interesting, too, how even the history of science shows these disappointments, like classical physics hoping for perfect predictability, then bumping into the uncertainties of quantum mechanics. It mirrors our individual experiences on a grand scale.
So this pattern repeats everywhere.
Yeah.
And our belief systems are key to coping.
Absolutely. Frameworks like Stoicism, focusing on inner resilience and accepting what you can't control, offer powerful tools. Modern acceptance-based therapies echo this. Learning to sit with difficult feelings, including disappointment, is linked to better well-being. It seems across the board, acknowledging and engaging with disappointment is seen as vital for a realistic, mature outlook.
Even feels like physics and math tie in. How?
Well, they're foundational to how we model reality, how we form expectations. Disappointment arises when reality deviates from those models. Classical physics aimed for predictable models. The disappointment of quantum mechanics was realizing the universe is inherently probabilistic at some levels. Logic helps us reason, so when logical expectations fail, it points to flawed premises or limits in our understanding, another form of disappointment. Probability theory tries to quantify expectations, but real-world uncertainty makes it messy. And cognitive science uses prediction error models. Disappointment is essentially a negative prediction error signal, telling our brain, update your model.
It all connects back to expectation prediction. Okay, final big area, AI. How does artificial intelligence fit into this very human picture of disappointment?
It's a fascinating and rapidly evolving area. First, there's AI trying to recognize human emotions, including disappointment. Emotional AI.
How does that work?
Mostly by analyzing data, facial expressions, voice tone, text sentiment, even physiological signals and matching patterns linked to different emotions in its training data. And AI is getting better at this classification.
But it's still just classification, right? It doesn't feel it.
Exactly. That's the critical distinction. It labels disappointment based on pattern matching, not subjective experience. It lacks sentience. And this leads to limitations. It struggles with nuance, context, cultural differences. It can easily misinterpret things, leading to, well, user disappointment with the AI itself.
Okay, but can AI model the process, the expectation-outcome mismatch part?
Yes, definitely. AI systems can be built to model that cognitive sequence. They track predictions, compare them to outcomes, register the error. There are strong parallels between the reward prediction error in our brains and the algorithms used in reinforcement learning in AI. An AI can computationally experience a negative prediction error when its guess is wrong.
But for the AI, it's just information, right? A signal to adjust its parameters.
Precisely. For the AI, it's an informational signal. Update your internal model. For humans, it's this rich, subjective, often painful experience with social and personal weight. AI can explain why someone might be disappointed based on correlations it learned. Unmet expectation X often correlates with expression Y, but it lacks the lived qualia.
And you mentioned the irony of we get disappointed with AI when it doesn't meet the hype, especially around understanding emotions. The AI fizzle.
That's right. There's this meta-level disappointment. AI is often overhyped, particularly its emotional intelligence. When it fails to deliver, misunderstands context, shows bias, lacks genuine empathy, users feel let down. It can even damage trust, especially if you thought you were interacting with a human and find out it was a subpar bot. It hammers home the difference, algorithms versus subjective feeling.
So AI can't feel it, and it often disappoints us. But could it still be useful in helping us understand or cope with our own disappointment?
Potentially, yes, in a couple of ways. First, understanding. AI can synthesize vast amounts of information from psychology, neuroscience, sociology, etc., to provide comprehensive explanations. It could be an advanced educational tool for emotional literacy.
Okay.
And its pattern recognition abilities might uncover subtle predictors or correlations in large data sets related to disappointment, though again, without true understanding.
What about using AI for support, like chatbots giving advice?
That's a growing area. AI chatbots and virtual companions are being developed for emotional support. They can offer empathetic-sounding responses, suggest coping strategies based on psychological frameworks. They have the appeal of being available 247 non-judgmental.
But
there are significant caveats. Over-reliance could stunt our own coping skills needed for real human relationships. Simulated empathy isn't real connection. It could even worsen isolation long-term.
the AI paradox of support. Helping too much weakens us.
Potentially, yeah. The goal should be helping humans manage and learn from disappointment, not trying to eliminate it or outsource the coping entirely. And that raises ethical questions.
Right, this idea of a frictionless humanity, a life born without a sense of human disappointments. Is that even desirable? Many philosophers and psychologists would argue strongly against it. Disappointment provides contrast, texture to life. It fosters resilience, learning, growth. Eliminating it could lead to shallow experiences and stunted development. AI can present information about death-ending disappointment, but it can't offer real solace or resolve personal meaning around mortality.
So the focus should be on AI assisting, not replacing. How could that look practically?
Things like AI tools helping us become more aware of our emotional patterns, emotional literacy, maybe AI-driven training programs for resilience, offering guided reflections. Critically, helping us manage expectations. AI could potentially help track our expectations, flag unrealistic ones, suggest reframing.
But ethically designed. Absolutely. Transparency is key. Knowing when you're talking to an AI, human oversight. Designing AI to augment human capabilities, not replace human connection. We need to remember AI's limits here. It struggles to truly grasp the depth of human disappointment. But perhaps those very limitations can prompt us to reflect more deeply on our own emotional lives. AI can help us see disappointment as an emergent property of a predictive brain learning to navigate the world.
Okay, so pulling it all together after this deep dive. Disappointment is just this incredibly complex tapestry. Biological, psychological, social, philosophical threads all woven together.
Exactly. It's universal, it shapes us, it drives us, it's a fundamental, multifaceted, and ultimately, probably important part of being human. It fuels learning and growth.
In AI, a potential tool, maybe for understanding, maybe for some support, but it's not magic. It can't feel it, and it can't replace the human journey of navigating it.
That seems to be the bottom line. AI can model the inputs and outputs, but not the experience itself.
So for you, the learner, listening in, maybe think about your own relationship with disappointment. How have those moments, big or small, shaped how you see yourself, how you see the world? And maybe what's just one small shift in perspective you could try next time things don't quite go to plan? Something to chew on.
This is DigitView.